Hello and welcome to another edition of MNI TV. My name is Heather Scott. I'm the Washington Bureau Chief for MNI, and with me is Steve Beckner, our Senior Federal Reserve Correspondent. Today, Steve covered the closing of the FOMC meeting, the Fed's policy setting board. Now, there wasn't a lot of news in the statement that they issued, so what were the significant changes, or what did you see out of the statement, Steve?
Well, there were no changes in policy per se. I mean, they kept the $85 billion per month of bond purchases. They, of course, continued the federal funds rate near zero, where it's been for more than 4.5 years now, and said that even after they end bond buying, that they will keep the funds rate very, very low for a considerable time. But there were a few nuances that caught the eyes of Fed watchers.
So what kind of hints did you get in those nuances as to what policy will look like going forward?
Well, I think I wouldn't want to make too much of them, but there were some interesting nuances. And we get into semantics here. There was, instead of saying there's been moderate growth, they're now saying there's modest growth. Now, to a lot of people, including myself, I don't think there's a great deal of difference between moderate and modest, but nevertheless, some people will see that as a little bit more of a dovish signal. I'd hesitate to overinterpret that. The other significant, and probably more significant aspect of the statement was where they said that persistently low or persistently below target, or words to that effect, inflation running persistently below the 2% target could pose risks to economic performance. That could also be interpreted as more of a dovish signal. I just see it as something that sort of to bring on board people who had been more vocal about their concern about excessive disinflation, in particular James Bullard, the St. Louis Fed president. And in fact, he dropped his dissent and voted with the majority. But I wouldn't make too much of that because at the same time the Fed said that this low inflation is probably due to transitory influences. They expect it to come back up to 2% and so forth. And they said that inflation expectations have remained stable, which is very important because if inflation expectations were falling, that would be a greater source of concern.
So, of course, a lot of people were thinking the Fed will start tapering or dialing back those asset purchases sometime later this year, September or possibly December. Where are you looking for hints of when that might happen?
Well, it's difficult to say. I mean, the chairman did say later this year, said that he repeated that in his latest congressional testimony. And I don't think there's any reason reading this statement to think otherwise. Now, whether it's September or later is just going to depend critically on whether not just job growth, but whether GDP grows fast enough to sustain an acceptable pace of job growth.
Right. Okay, well, we have some speeches from various Federal Reserve Bank presidents coming up, and we'll be watching those for any more hints on the policy direction. And we'll have you back next time to give some more insight on Fed policy. Thank you for joining us for another episode of MNI TV.